Composition is one of the most important elements when starting to render. So that's why today we're going to share 7 tips to improve your rendering composition skills. Before you start modeling, I would suggest to have in mind an angle that you want to render your project from. Composition can make or break an image, and you should treat it equally as important as lighting or materials in your scene. Once you're sure that the composition you have chosen brings the best out of your image and your file, you're already halfway to creating a stunning image. Therefore, we're going to move on to tip number 1, aspect ratio. The aspect ratio and the resolution of the image mainly depends on what platform you would be using your image on. If you're going to be using it for computer screens or thumbnails, I would suggest you to use an aspect ratio of 16:9. If the picture is going to be showcased in social media, I like to use the aspect ratio of 4:5 or a 1080x1350 resolution, since it kind of fills up a good portion of the viewer's screen, and if they're scrolling through Instagram or LinkedIn, the image is probably going to pop up and catch their attention. If you're using it for Instagram stories or any kind of platform that features the whole phone screen, I would suggest to use an aspect ratio of 9:16 or a resolution of 1080x1920. But if you also plan on placing that image in your portfolio, make sure you know where that image is going to sit at in your layout. That way you choose the right aspect ratio beforehand. Obviously, sharing your image online isn't always your main goal with the render, so you cannot always base your aspect ratio off of that. Your aspect ratio can also depend on the shape of the object that you're modeling, the surroundings of the objects, etc. The second tip is field of view. So field of view is one of the settings in this category as well, and naturally our eyes have a field of view of 50 to 60 degrees, but that doesn't mean we always have to follow that. Interior images sometimes are usually taken with a wider field of view, especially when they're specialized for real estate marketing in order to capture more of the space than usual. You also have to be careful with this, since you don't want the field of view to go to extreme highs or extreme lows, since it will distort the image and make it look very weird. Make sure to play around with this setting in every render, since different images will need different fields of view. Perspective is another key component when it comes to architectural rendering. There's different types of perspectives that you can choose from in every rendering engine. Usually the ones I use the most are the 2-point perspective and the 3-point perspective. If your images are being taken from eye level, I would suggest you use the 2-point perspective, and the reason behind that is that it will make all vertical lines in 90 degrees and in the same angle in regards to one another. Otherwise, vertical lines that are set to the side of the image will look distorted and very weird. We naturally see in 3-point perspective, but 2-point perspective brings out the qualities of most buildings, and that's what is used the most of the time for architectural images, with one exception. If you're taking aerial renders or bird's eye view renders, 2-point perspective will look very distorted and very weird. Therefore, 3-point perspective is the right option to use in those cases. Structure rules are basically rules which identify in what hierarchy the elements should be placed in an image. There's composition rules like the rule of thirds, where you divide the image in 9 equal spaces and you place the main subject in the intersection of the lines, or the centering rule, where you have a symmetric building that you place in the center of your image, which gives your building power. There's plenty of other composition rules that are great starting points if you're a beginner, but you shouldn't always rely on these rules. Every rule doesn't always work for every project, so instead I believe you should rely more on your instinct after you have made some experience in 3D ArchViz or 3D rendering in general. I don't want to go into too much detail on all the scientific stuff behind these rules and why they work. I explain them in more detail in our Instagram page, so feel free to check that out in the link in the description. Most experienced artists don't always check if they're following the rule of thirds or the golden rule or any other rule. Their eyes just get used to what looks correct, but as I said, it's good to keep them in mind. Another great tip is to incorporate other elements in your rendering. Elements like cars, people, or vegetation are great for two main reasons. They give us an idea of the scale of the object, and they can give us an idea of the activities that can take place in that building. They're also a great way to narrate the viewer's attention into what we believe is important in the image. This is a great example where the person is giving us an idea that the path probably leads to the entrance of the building. This photo also incorporates a technique called leading lines, where outlines of shapes, paths, roads, etc. lead our eye into something that matters in the image. In this example right here, the girl with the bike is looking at the house, and that immediately redirects our eyes on where she's looking, since that gives us the sense that something interesting is happening that way. With that said, we still want to make sure that we're not oversaturating our scene with these kind of elements, and that we're keeping it simple, which is also related to our next point. Negative space is a space in the image where the viewer's eye can rest. In architecture, you've probably heard the phrase less is more many times. Therefore, we would want to leave out some space for the building to breathe. With renders, we want to bring out the qualities of the design, and having too much unnecessary elements can take the focus out of the viewer's eye. For example, in the image right here, we have the foreground, which is a very dynamic with rocks, and you have the house in the center horizontally, and then you have the clear sky, which serves as negative space. If the sky would be more dramatic with a wider range of colors or cloudier, it would make the scene way too messy, since both the foreground and the sky would be dramatic. Make sure to not overwhelm the viewers with information to the point that they don't even know what the focal point is in the scene, which is the most important aspect for your rendering composition, and that's why this is the last tip we're going to talk about. But before we do, if you've enjoyed so far, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, since I will be uploading a lot more videos sharing a lot more value in the near future. The focal element is something that the viewer's attention is driven to. We as 3D artists would want to navigate the viewer's eye to what we believe is important, and to do so there's many methods that we can utilize. A great way to direct our viewer's eye is using contrast. Using contrast is like magnet for people's attention in many ways, and not only in rendering, and we can use contrast with colors, with lighting, or using different types of textures with different roughness, etc. The example right here is a great one for when we create contrast with the lighting. The atmosphere of the sky is very cloudy and makes the environment dark, but on the other hand, the lights inside of the building are very warm, and that immediately catches our attention and drives focus over there. If your focal element is in the center, using a vignette is also a great way of shifting the viewer's focus in the center of the image. The vignette takes away the distractions alongside the frame of the image, just like the render that we have shown right here. Or maybe you don't have to emphasize an element anymore, but instead you have to make other elements more distinct. One of the ways to do this is through fog, like our example right here where the fog is toning down the trees in the back. Or you can consider using blur on other elements, especially if the render is being taken up close or it's a detailed render for a specific type of product or anything else similar to that. And finally, one of the best ways to drive attention to something is through motion. If everything else is static and then you have an element that is moving, that element is definitely going to drive attention. Like in our example right here, where the person is moving and is definitely one of the points where our eyes go at first. Or in this other image, where the right side of the image is getting way too much attention, so the tram in motion balances the dynamics of the whole render. Alright, so this was it for the video. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section down below. Check out the Patreon and leave a like in this video, and I will see you in the next one.